So we've got two fantastic talks this afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Danielle Terceiro. She is a school teacher and a PhD candidate at Africanfuturist University College, completing her PhD by publication. Her research considers how meaning is made through the interaction of word and image in multimodal texts such as picture books and graphic novels. And today she is going to be speaking on lessons for Christians from African sci-fi. Welcome, Danielle.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me, and also for having me both as an in-person person and as a virtual person in another stream. So thanks very much. And I thought I'd just do a bit of a fun thing, and I'm going to refer to this text during my presentation, but I thought if you want to hand it around the classroom, please, feel free to have a look. Thank you so much. So I'm exploring the idea today that the producers of Africanfuturist comics are storytellers that use sci-fi thought experiments to show us how and why scientific and technical networks can form, and how new understandings of the world can be cultivated and diffused through society. Nnedi Okorafor is a Nigerian-American author who defined Africanfuturism in her 2019 blog post. Africanfuturism is concerned with visions of the future, is interested in technology, leaves the earth, skews optimistic, is centred on and predominantly written by people of African descent, Black people, and it is rooted first and foremost in Africa. It's less concerned with what could have been and more concerned with what is and will be. It acknowledges, grapples with, and carries what has been. The first text that we're going to look at is the last comic in the series about Shuri, produced by Marvel. Nnedi Okorafor wrote the script for most of the... Oh, there we have her. Yep. So that's Nnedi Okorafor, and then we go to Shuri. Nnedi Okorafor wrote the script for most of the Shuri comic book series, and you might be familiar with Shuri from the Black Panther movies. She's a princess, King T'Challa's younger sister, a scientist, a fan of technology, and often presented in the movies as impatient with tradition and ritual. By contrast, Shuri in the comic book version is more a mix of the prehistoric and hypermodern. She is still intensely interested in science, but her superpower is that she has continuing access to the voices and wisdom of her Wakandan ancestors, and she has wings and is able to turn to stone and to shapeshift. But before we get further into Shuri and Africanfuturist comics, we will consider the real-life scientist who is perhaps the first version of a scientific superhero. So that's the next slide. Yeah. And this person is Louis Pasteur, who was born 200 years ago this year. Pasteur featured heavily in comic books from the 1930s, and you could buy these comic books alongside the comic books with fictional superheroes. And famous scientists from our time have confessed to taking up science as a vocation after being inspired by these comic book portrayals of Pasteur. So I have an extract. So the next slide is an extract from a comic book series that was popular in the Spanish-speaking world. Pasteur is peering intently into his microscope, declaring that although he knows that his theory against spontaneous generation is correct, he must prove it unequivocally. This comic book is drawing on a romantic trope, which is the idea of a lone genius who will change the world through sheer power of intellectual will. If we were to tell a romantic superhero version of Pasteur's life now, we would say that Pasteur transformed into a kind of superhero as he moved from chemistry to biology to revolutionising the medical realm and securing it from harmful microbes. He saw germs for what they are, our mortal enemies. Before then, physicians and surgeons had been struggling with an invisible enemy, Pasteur made this enemy visible and he eliminated it with his scientific superpowers. He broke through the scientific floundering of the time and applied his genius in the laboratory to develop breakthrough results in immunising animals and humans against infectious diseases like rabies, which had previously gripped the world in fear. But of course, we know that scientific research is not like the romantic narrative of a lone genius, that it is always far more messy, complicated and collaborative. Bruno Latour, a French thinker who died only last month, was interested in the way complex relationships play out in a laboratory, and he observed scientific research in action for a while. He released a book called Laboratory Life in the 1970s. And Latour helped us to think through how scientific and technological change happens within social groups. He used Pasteur as a case study because this romantic narrative of the lone genius has been so strongly attached to Pasteur through history. And Latour wanted to show that social networks are always important, even for Pasteur. So Latour examined scientific journals from Pasteur's time and could see that Pasteur's scientific career was more drift and happenstance than we realise. Many tangents and following things where they might lead. In some ways, the clear-cut breakthroughs attributed to Pasteur were a product of Pasteur's own expert ability in PR, his ability to spin things in retrospect. During Pasteur's period of intense scientific research, the hygienists of his time, who were working intently at making cities clean and their citizens healthy, working through many ideas and options, became intensely interested in Pasteur's work, and their association with him helped him to diffuse his ideas throughout society. This is not to minimise the importance of Pasteur's scientific work, it's just to say that, as we all know deep down anyway, it was not all about him. Latour suggests that we need to sit back and watch which actors form a social group, have a keen and curious eye to see what these actors want, what causes them to act, and the ways in which they can be weakened or linked together. Actors modify the world through their impact on other actors within a network. One interesting observation that Latour makes is that science and religion should not be conceived of as battling a territorial war. Rather, religion is always there, and we need to notice it. In Latour's language, it is important to notice the metaphysical innovations proposed by ordinary actors. We should not consider ourselves capital M moderns, interested in capital S science, and with no use for religious language of any sort. Rather, within our networks, there's always a mix of the prehistoric and the hypermodern. And religious language can actually help us bring into a transformative relationship with history and bring us into a relationship with what appears to be absent. It translates the past for the future, it renews the present. Latour says that one of the ways we can observe and identify all the actors within a network, including the non-human actors, is to use scientifiction to understand the connection between humans and their world. Latour says that sociologists have a lot to learn from artists, and I believe that we have a lot to learn, in particular today, from African-futurist comic book artists. So back to Shuri. I'm presenting from the last comic book in this series because it shows how the actors within a network come together to apply technological insight and affect positive change. It shows the network assembling for the good, and it demonstrates the optimism that Nnedi Okorafor describes as an important aspect of Africanfuturism. This comic series sees Wakandan existence threatened by a giant alien insect in the middle panel, who is eating up memories on the Wakandan ancestor plane. In the panel at the top of this page, we see the ancestors noting that their advice makes Wakandans all that they are meant to be. The male face in the centre of the page belongs to Muti, Shuri's mysterious hacker friend, who reveals himself to be a mutant with technology superpowers. He tells Shuri that his name, Muti, also translates as African traditional medicine man. So we see the prehistoric and the hypermodern are being networked. Muti attends to the threat of some smaller tag-along insects while Shuri deals with the giant insect. Muti hacks into the mind of the smaller insects, noting that they are just like weak programs. His face is at the centre of the page. surrounded by zeros, or towards the bottom a bit more, surrounded by zeros and ones, and conjures the idea of a hypnotic chant from a digital world. Muchi's words here, which are "things fall apart, the centre cannot hold," are an interesting allusion to a poem that William Butler Yeats wrote as he dealt with the devastating aftermath of World War I and the effects of the ensuing influenza epidemic on his family. These words are also the title of a novel written by Nigerian author Chinua Achebe in 1958, which explored the harmful effects of colonialism. What these words connote here in this comic are, by contrast, the dispersal of harmful forces and the neutralisation of parasites through a healthy, networked collaboration. Things falling apart is not necessarily a bad thing, and these things can be restored back into a healthy network. So I've left you on a bit of a cliffhanger here. We're going to return to Shuri and the giant insect at the end of the presentation. Another thinker that I would like to bring into the network of ideas within this presentation is the Italian philosopher Emmanuel Caccia. His recent book, so it's only last year, Metamorphoses, provided some food for thinking for me as I prepared this presentation. He describes this book as a radicalised version of the Gaia hypothesis, which you might be familiar with. So Caccia emphasises the interconnectedness and continuity of humans with non-humans in our environment, and how everything is potentially an agent of transformation for the other as we migrate across each other's worlds. So we're going to consider his ideas as we examine LaGuardia, which is the graphic novel circulating, and that has script by Nnedi Okorafor. LaGuardia is an airport in New York and an important part of a network for intergalactic travel. Okorafor shows her African-futurist optimism in the way Nigeria welcomes aliens and by depicting positive transformations that can occur through human and non-human, including alien interaction. In Nigeria, humans are experiencing health benefits because of the application of regenerative alien DNA. Alien life does not appear to experience pain. LaGuardia presents Nigeria as the most welcoming place on earth for aliens. However, there are other networks with different objectives at work in the country. On this page, we see Biafrans from within Nigeria campaigning for what they see as a pure society, one not contaminated by aliens. When this group finds out that Citizen, a professor of agriculture, has alien DNA through his accidental flesh wound contact with alien floral people, they bomb his university offices to kill the contamination. LaGuardia makes this language of contamination and purity seem rigid and especially problematic when it is applied to a nation's politics. The way Africa here is personified as a holographic head, with Nigeria and Biafra delineated within a brain area, highlights that the idea of African nation-states are a human construct. In LaGuardia, transformation through encounter with the non-human is prioritised over the rigidity of human boundaries that might be applied to keep a people and its environment pure. So in LaGuardia, Citizen, a professor of agriculture, goes to America to be with Future, his pregnant fiancée, who will go on to give birth to a human baby which has alien DNA. On this page, Future is tending the alien floral person who has taken root in her backyard in New York. This floral person, called Let Me Live, will become a sort of messianic figure. Future will bring it into the sterile hospital environment, which is not officially friendly to aliens, and will be invited to eat its seed at the point she gives birth. And then the alien floral person will die. In the first panel, Future notes that she and Citizen have been transformed in ways that science can't understand because they have alien DNA. Let Me Live, the alien floral person, encourages Future and Citizen to look to family for answers, implying that alien plants are now incorporated into the human family. When Future asks whether Let Me Live would be happy with the reverse, i.e. having human DNA, Let Me Live replies that my people travel far. We root and then travel more. We are used to and happy to pick up family along the way. Kachia says that our contemporary understanding of the city is based on an old-fashioned romantic framework that sees nature as wild and free and that then sees the city as a pure space. In reality, Kachia says, agriculture is everywhere. Every living creature is tending the garden of another living creature, and this idea is conveyed throughout LaGuardia. Kachia is also critical of our idea of ecology, which has fixed ideas of what particular life form should be part of any given community. Let Me Live's travelling family challenges this idea of ecology. Let Me Live's family is dynamic, adaptable, inclusive, and on the move, not a sedentary or insular family household. But I realise that I've still left you on that Shuri cliffhanger, and I don't want to leave you hanging. So what happens with Shuri and the giant alien insect who is out eating memories on the Wakandan ancestor plane? Well, Shuri is able to enter into the memories of the alien insect itself, and she understands that this insect has been devouring memories because of their intense connection to music. Shuri enters an insect memory landscape that is full of vegetation, colour and rhythm. In the page that I am showing, she is able to bring the insect back to size and stop its parasitic ways by promising it that she will show it some great music so that it can stop some overblown nonsense like wanting to take over all the universe. And now we quickly return to Louis Pasteur and his important work. Pasteur became expert in shrinking microbes in the laboratory, taking them out of their environment and into his sterile, pasteurised laboratory, and making vaccines to protect humans and animals from disease. Shuri and Pasteur show different ways that a scientific network can be protective. Pasteur brings his laboratory into the field or the farm to demonstrate to amazed crowds how he can win a war against disease by shrinking a microbe and turning it into a vaccine. Shuri shrinks her opponent through a bit of expert but very intimate fieldwork, entering into her opponent's mind and drawing on the expert knowledge of others in her culture to soothe it, stop it from attacking others, and network it back into a vibrant sensory and cultural life. For Shuri, we see that science can be cultured too. So are there some lessons we can take away from Shuri's world and the other texts we have looked at today? What are humans? LaGuardia in particular highlights the view that it is harmful to conceive of humans as pure and self-enclosed. Can we patrol the borders of what it means to be a human? We have learned so much about the invisible world since Louis Pasteur's time, when what was invisible was conceived of as the enemy, and there was a war on germs. Now we know that our bodies host a multitude of different microbes and that many of these microbes give us life. They have what is called a symbiotic relationship with us. This life that we host helps us to do things like digest food and to regulate our emotional health. Is it even possible for us to look at our bodies and work out where the human bits end and the non-human bits begin? These are questions that philosophers and popular culture are asking us to engage with. What are scientists? These African futurist texts show us different ways of conceiving of science and the scientist, moving away from the idea of a capital S science that Latour described. Science is always embedded within the social. Science helps to shape our understanding of the political, and science can be in dialogue with religion too. The comic book version of Shuri shows that it can be helpful to draw on ancient wisdom and culture within our networks, even while doing science. What is a good ethical framework? Shuri and LaGuardia are books that are interesting conversation partners for Christians. They resist a very hierarchical view of the world in which humans are at the top of the ladder, and they resist the idea of human control and mastery. Instead, the idea seems to be to facilitate participation in networks that come together in passing to solve a solution or to create meaning. Within these networks, an ethical stance is necessary because we all, human and non-humans, have the potential to transform each other within our relationships for good or for ill. As Kachia says, we can't help but tend each other's gardens as we migrate through each other's life worlds. As Christians, perhaps we can think and elaborate on the idea of what loving God and our neighbour means in our networks. Perhaps we need to speak for our non-human neighbours and use ancient wisdom to help give them a voice. This seems to be something that the United Nations is interested in doing. It has what it calls a harmony with nature dialogue, and it proposes to elaborate what it calls earth-centred law. Caccia, our Italian philosopher, also says that he thinks it is only the Creator God who has the ability to see the world as a whole and an ordered society, as an order of actors following a logic. I think that we can push back on this as Christians. Is there an order within creation that humans are especially equipped to see and to cultivate, given that we are created in God's image? What special responsibilities are given to us in Genesis 1 verse 28, where my translation tells me that God commands us to fill the earth and subdue it, and to rule over living creatures? I'm thinking that these verses call us to a humility rather than a hubris, and don't necessarily imply a human-centric ecology. But at the same time, we can, with God's help, try to put a big picture together of our world and its interconnectedness in order to better care for it. So we know that Adam is asked to name the animals, and I wonder if this is God giving us an inkling that our ongoing task in creation care would involve a serious and ongoing scientific endeavour, and that this endeavour would recognise the responsibilities that we have to cultivate relationships within our networks and help foster positive transformations within our networks. I'm thinking that the potential for positive mutual transformation through relationship between humans and non-humans too might be what creation is calling out for in Romans 8, when creation groans and longs for the children of God to be revealed to it so that its suffering can come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I think we've got time for just two very quick questions. Bronwyn says, I'm on her wavelength here. She says, the Western idea of a scientist in a lab coat, often male, sometimes working alone, and sometimes a bit crazy. How can we get rid of this?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and that's exactly why I love Shuri so much, and that's why I was keen to bring Shuri to you today, because she is exactly not that idea. So she's networked within her communities. She's part of a culture that's not white Anglo culture. And the author of Shuri and the book that I passed around was actually saying that as a child, she really struggled with this. So she's growing up in Nigeria. She loved science, but in all the texts she was reading, and she loved reading science fiction, in all the texts that she read, it was only ever like a male, that kind of version of a scientist that was presented. And she is hoping that through her characters that many people can see that there are many different ways of being a scientist, and there are many different people that can be scientists. Yeah.
Great. Now, Dory, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. No, it's not a question. I love that anthropomorphic metaphor for Africa as an intellectual construct. You know, that cranium. Just a thought that I have. You know, how many Africas don't we entertain in this way? You know, we all have our Africas. You know, or all of which are our constructs actually. But just a comment. There's no question there.
Yeah, no, that's why I put up that slide, because I just found it so interesting that so much of that text was about the organic and engaging with agriculture and plants, and then that idea of Africa that was very problematic in the context of the political protests. You can just see so clearly from that. It's like a visual metaphor, isn't it? You can just see so clearly that the artist is trying to make us think that it's something quite separate from this organic world. Yeah, thank you.
This is a good question. Somebody has said that they don't necessarily agree with the idea that Pasteur and his colleagues saw the invisible as intrinsically the enemy, because he also investigated and pioneered fermentation.
Yes.
Which is a good thing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I guess what I was trying to present in that narrative was something a bit overblown, wasn't I? So in that narrative, when I'm saying he's fighting the enemy, that's kind of the narrative that was put into the comic book versions of Pasteur. So what I'm saying is it's a very superhero exaggerated caricature of what he was doing. And I actually think that metaphor of war, when you apply it to science, can be quite problematic. And so there's lots of literature recently about how we've been approaching the COVID virus, and linguists are saying it might actually not be that helpful to always talk about a war on this virus, that what it does, it has a lot of unhelpful things, like we're positioning our health workers to be in a battle, and so we're putting them out into really bad conditions, and it's like a win-lose scenario. So like, who are the losers? Like, it's the kind of metaphor of war is not that helpful. So yeah, in my description, I wasn't actually saying that I think that's a good description of Pasteur. I was kind of trying to have fun with the caricature, the superhero kind of caricature. Yeah.
Great. Now, I know you've got to go and catch a plane, but we really appreciate you coming all the way here to share that wonderful talk.
Thank you
all
so
right.
much.
Thank you very much.